On this episode of Lapeef, Let's Talk.
The biggest factors in establishing whether or not somebody is an adult, because if you do take that stance and you say, well, age isn't the determining factor, then you'd have to go all the way on the other side, right? You'd have to say, oh, okay, well, then if you feel like you're mature enough, then you should be able to go and buy alcohol. You should be able to go in certain spaces, right? You can't have it both ways. Either you got to be one way, all the way as far as establishing the rules and the standards one way, or you got to be all the way the other way and accept it on both sides. And we can't let teenagers have sex with grown men at certain ages. Whereas if you're 21 years old, you can have sex with whoever you want to that's above, a certain age. But, ethically, morally, we set standards based off of past experiences, and past experiences taught us that you need to be a certain age and be able to make certain decisions. Largely, overwhelmingly, you always gonna have an anomaly here or there, but basically, to set the foundation, you absolutely age establishes whether or not you're an adult.
Right. And I think it's culturally based, because if you and I were to take a trip to Africa, if we would go to Nigeria, if we would go to Ghana, if we go to, anywhere in the diaspora or whatever, right, we would see young men being charged with and being groomed to lead households at a relatively young age. It's only when we get into the Western culture that we begin to push back on that. And, people can debate whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent or whatever, but only in the Western culture is it understood that, you're not a man until you're 21, and your brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25.
Yeah. So this is what I'm asking, because regardless of culture and where we deem you as legal or non-legal, but I would assume that our brain development is, the cerebral cortex in the heart, in the head says it doesn't develop until you are 25. So does that development, because that all, the frontal lobe, determines, understanding reason and being able to understand right and wrong and understanding,
decision making.
Decision make correct. So would that not be a part of being an adult?
No, absolutely. And again, what I'm saying is, in the Western culture context, this makes sense. In indigenous cultures, young men, I'm not speaking to young women or about young women. I have no information or no insight regarding that. I'm just saying what I understand about young men. In indigenous cultures, they're indoctrinated and groomed to assume responsibility at a much younger age.
I think that the thing that bridges what you and Courtney are saying, because I understand both of you fully, is that if you go like to Chicago, what you're talking about, certain other cultures, there's an entire familial network. Whereas in the United States and, other places, there's a lot of individualism. So like, I get what Courtney's saying, because you're out on your own, you should be older because you don't have necessarily as much counsel around you. Whereas if you are maybe from somewhere else where family is big, like I know, in Nigeria is, at least where my family's from, it's a big thing. Like you still live right near your family. Y'all live in the same like compound. So yeah, you might be considered an adult at a younger age, but there's so many people around you that you won't necessarily be, making certain choices. Whereas in this country, if you're just out in the world at 15 or 18 even, or even 21 or whatever, without a certain level of development, it could pose some issues.
If I can add,
go ahead. If
I can add, I definitely agree with what everyone is saying. I think this is one of those questions that's definitely left up to so many different interpretations. But to feed off of what you are saying, Kay, I definitely do feel like it's relative, because there are people, especially in like other countries, if you want to go to like Caribbean countries like Jamaica and stuff like that, where I mean they've been doing their own thing for maybe since they were 7 years old, and especially when you have a lot of family members that like migrate to the US or migrate to the UK, you have these, what we would consider over here, where we live, children who have like full literal lives. Like, at like 15, 16, they have like children, they know how to raise a family. Like they can sit down and really have a conversation with a 30-year-old and you can't tell the two apart. So I definitely think that it's definitely relative to location for sure. And culture. Yeah.
I want to get to Anton. Anton, does age determine adulthood?
It absolutely does. Every single person that just answered this question is completely wrong. 1000% wrong. And ironically enough, I think people are trying to substitute maturity with being an adult. And it's a difference, right? Really, what we're trying to say, or what we should be saying, is that being an adult does not absolve you from responsibility. That's the difference, right? We all say that we know this guy and he's 40 years old and he still acts like a little child. Doesn't mean that he's not an adult. Doesn't mean that he does not participate in doing adult things. It doesn't mean that he can't go and drive a 3,000-pound missile down the street without anybody telling him that he can't. Doesn't mean that he can't go and buy alcohol at the store. Like, it doesn't absolve you from the responsibility. And so I think that people are conflating the two instead of being able to separate it. Now, another point that people are making is comparing Western culture to other countries and other cultures. I've only lived here, right? I've visited a lot of places, but I abide by the standards that we set here, right? And so I don't look at previous generations as far as evaluating or establishing how it is that I'm going to place somebody in an adult space, right? And often at times people use that as an excuse in order to not be responsible for the ways in which they act and operate, especially, guys that want to still live in their mother's basement, as somebody that illustrated, right? But the point that I'm making is that it takes 21 years to be 21 years old, and it's the reason why they established that as the foundation or the basis by which you can do certain things and you can get in certain places and so on and so forth, right? You can't even get in the casino unless you're 21 years old. And so Courtney kind of hit on it a little bit when she said that the maturity or the development of your brain, right? It more or less is around 25 years old, right? So the point that I'm just making is that I do believe that age absolutely is one of the biggest factors in establishing whether or not somebody is an adult. Because if you do take that stance and you say, well, age isn't the determining factor, then you'd have to go all the way on the other side, right? You'd have to say, oh, okay, well, then if you feel like you're mature enough, then you should be able to go and buy alcohol. You should be able to go in certain spaces, right? You can't have it both ways. Either you got to be one way, all the way as far as establishing the rules and the standards one way, or you got to be all the way the other way and accept it on both sides. And we can't let teenagers have sex with grown men at certain ages. Whereas if you're 21 years old, you can have sex with whoever you want to that's above, a certain age. But, ethically, morally, we set standards based off of past experiences, and past experiences taught us that you need to be a certain age and be able to make certain decisions. Largely, overwhelmingly, you always gonna have an anomaly here or there, but basically, to set the foundation, you absolutely age establishes whether or not you're an adult.